What's going on with debut? Welcome to Debut, the interview series. We're talking about a fusion of storytelling and play. You may be asking what debut is, and that's exactly what it is. It's bringing three amazing and accomplished storytellers to tell a story for you for the very first time. You are their first audience. And then after they tell the story, we go through playful and purposeful practice. You say that three times fast. Here we are with debut, and I'd like to bring on the next storyteller that's with me, who will also be telling on March 28th. She is a wonderful storyteller. She's accomplished. She's Appalachian. She's Appalachian. She says she can call herself a hillbilly, and I think I can too because I have the roots, but make sure that you have the roots. She knows how to spin a cultural tale so that it gives its world dominance and at the same time has resonance all over the world. Ladies and gentlemen, Omope Carter da Boyiku. Omope, glad to see you here.
Glad to be here, Kevin.
It's wonderful to have you on debut as a friend, a colleague, as a storyteller. Um, uh, Tell me a little bit. I mean, you have a rich background just reading your biography. Uh,
Yeah.
but tell me a little bit about what brought you as a storyteller.
Oh man, desperation. it's,
Okay.
it's what did it for me. Seriously, I was at a fork in the road and I didn't have a knife or a spoon. Okay. And I
Story
had a
saves you,
dream.
please.
I had a dream. And in this dream, my mother came to me, and my mother had been deceased since 1983, and I had never seen her in my dreams. And this was in 1990. And I was expecting my first child, and it was obvious that the marital contract that I had that was supposed to be my Social Security wasn't working out. And my mother opened the door. She did those old timey sign things. She put her finger to her lips like this, and then she pulled down her eye, which means don't say anything, just watch. I used to watch old people do hand language and talk to each other without using words, right? And so I paid attention in the dream, and in the dream I saw my my so-called beloved at a party and was in Nigeria and was able to hear a conversation. Now, for many people who are not raised to honor signs and portents and dreams, this might sound ridiculous. But I had been asked a couple of weeks before at the Worthington Art Festival if I would apply to the Ohio Arts Council's Arts and Education program. At the time I was asked, I felt terribly secure in my relationship, and I smiled and took it as a compliment. After that dream, I rolled over, called the Ohio Art Council. These days we did things by phone and by post. And so I rolled over, I called the people at OAC and I said, send me the application. They said, well, you got to design a whole month's residency and have a performance date. I said, I understand. Just send me the paperwork. And so within 48 hours of receiving the paperwork, it was back in the mail. And I did my audition at 8.5 months, expecting my first child. And they were kind of concerned when I went to crouch to look like a frog. And wanted to make sure I wasn't going to throw that baby on the floor. And I told them, no, I'm scheduled for a C-section. I promise not to deliver. But they delivered. And that was May of 1990, it'll be, 30 years last May, about to be 31 years of doing this. And so it was my second marriage, my go-to guy. It was I could call it the second job, but it became the job, and any other thing had to be in alignment with the opportunities to share story.
Wow.
So sometimes when people ask me, what did storytelling do for you? I tell them it saved my life, because without having to do that personal inventory and find out what skill sets I could tap, since I was going to have to be a party of one and eventually raising two children, I had to figure out how to use the talents that I had in order to make some more money, so I could raise the children comfortably, or as comfortably as one person can alone, trying to be multiple people to multiple masters. But storytelling wound up being something that was consistent. It reestablished myself. I don't mean in the pronoun, I mean in the entity concept. I had been hiding underneath what I thought would be the security of marriage, and really had not had the need to pull out all the stops and use every tool in the toolkit. You know what I'm saying?
Definitely.
So I had been a oral, what do they call them people, statesman in high school. I was in this honorary called Quill and Pen, and I also did extemporary speaking even in high school. And so as I was looking at some assets, I remembered a competition. I had written a piece and I performed as Sojourner Truth. Now, being 4'11" and 3/4, I had to pull for a whole lot of fortitude to be Sojourner Truth, who was 6 foot tall. But after that presentation, one of the judges asked me, "What are you going to do with your life?" And this is before I even had that opportunity with OAC. I said, "Well, I'm not really clear." He said, "Well, whatever you do, you make sure you try to find a work that includes your voice, because you have an outstanding, very unusual voice." And I thanked him for that and took it into consideration, since he was a professor at the University of Cincinnati's College of Music Conservatory. So, I knew he wasn't trying to pull my leg or or trying to get something, because I didn't have anything to give. So when I got to that place where I had to do that reassessment work, I thought about what Dr. McCall had said to me. And I was like, well, they've always said I had this great booming voice. So let me see if there's something I can do with this.
So
And evidently, there's something I can do with that.
in a real sense, story is survival,
Yeah.
story livelihood. We often think that the person on that stage, does this for an hour or once every blue moon, but there are people all over the world that this is their livelihood. This, and especially during the pandemic, we need to be reminded
Yeah.
of things like that. And story saved you in a great sense.
Yes.
And I'm sure that had a resonance. You said when you were a child, I was a forensics coach, a speech and drama coach, and I was
Hmm.
amazed. And still to this day, I hear from students that were involved in the program. But one of the programs was the National Youth Storytelling Olympics. I was the executive director. It's now Showcase. I remember Erin came up and she told Rudyard Kipling's The Elephant's Child. And one of the
Mm-hmm.
professors stood up in the back, came up to Erin and said, "I have a," and she was, I don't know, just a teen. She said, "I have a 75% full scholarship for you as soon as you graduate."
Hmm.
And I'm sure that only raised because she's only become more talented. So we never know where story's going to carry us. And
No,
so,
we don't.
and
As a matter of fact,
mhm.
I remember going to my first professional storytelling workshop, and that first baby was in my lap, still a nursing baby. And I was at the Ohio State University, their folklore project. And I do believe there was this graduate student named Kevin Cordi that was leading the workshop.
Oh, is that
So when
right?
you tell people that we've known each other for years, you are not telling a lie.
It is true.
We've known each other for years, and you, without your knowing, was part of my launch.
Oh,
Hmm.
well,
So I think this is an opportunity to say thanks for the circle. Every round's supposed to go higher and higher, and
uh,
it has.
that does my heart proud. And in turn, I've learned from you, and so it's great that we're coming together yet again. And
Absolutely.
that is so funny that you never know who you're talking to
Nope.
or with or for. um,
That's why old people say you're supposed to treat everybody like an angel because you never know when they're coming back your way.
and well, some people need that lesson book a little bit. And you're also steeped in folklore. You already talked about some of the signs and portents. How has folklore merged with your storytelling, if it has?
Hmm. Well, I've learned after being a child and wanting to live someplace that was cultured, that culture is me. Culture is you.
Hmm.
Culture is what we do. It took me a while to realize that. And then it took me another little while to realize that my grandparents had sown their hopes and aspirations in me. I know that parents do that with their own children, but the relationship between grandparents is real different than parenting. My grandparents, especially my mother's father, told me things he didn't tell her. He gave me plant wisdom that she didn't want to know, or he decided she wasn't able to hold it all. And then because I was born at the beginning of the 1950s, when we would say language was very different then than it is now, old people around me were still referred to in the third person plural. Go ask them what they want on their plate. Language, metaphor. I lived about four houses up from what I learned later was the central social corner for African American community. Although my community was always mixed, culturally mixed. Had people from Lebanon in my community. The lady across the street from me was Czech. The folk around the corner from my grandparents were from Hungary, two or three generations removed. So we all knew each other. And the way that old people used language then was musical, metaphorical, illusionary, because grown folks could talk all around children, and children were not supposed to know what grown folks were talking about. My mother's father gave us our history every Memorial Day. We would sit on our porch, and my mother's sisters and brother would come home, and he'd gather all the children around him and say to us, "I don't want you to forget who we were before we come up here north, so that we could just be colored." It was easier being colored in Ohio than it was being a breed. He would use that word. Okay.
Omope, how have you infused folklore into your life?
Well, I'm one of the folk, and I've listened to a whole lot of lore in my life. My mother's father would gather us on the porch every Memorial Day because I'm from Ironton, Ohio, which is in southern Ohio. And every year, my grandparents' children would come home. And then after my grandmother passed, my mother's mother, my aunts and uncles still came home every Memorial Day. And her father, my grandfather Ellis, would gather us around his feet, all his grandchildren, and tell us the story of how we became colored. That's how he would call it. And it's what my birth certificate says. And he said, "I want you to know who we were before we came north." His father, he told me, used to say it was either being colored in Ohio than it was being a breed on the Georgia Tennessee border. And I understood what he meant by that. So I've always listened to the genealogy of my mother's family. That's how I came to know it. I listened to old people use old language. Old people used to be able to speak in front of children, and children didn't know what they were talking about. The way they would turn a phrase, the rhythm that they would use, the insults that they could sling that sounded like compliments, all of that, I've been able to understand that use of language. And I grew up about four doors down from the corner. But I was grown before I realized the cultural significance of the corner, which of course had a church and two bars on it. So
So there's a whole
and,
different stories that are moving in.
and a barbershop across the street in the park where the old men used to have stuff in brown paper bags that they used to swallow from time to time. So listening to old men and young men try to outmen each other, that's a whole nother set of stories.
You know, as you're
I think
talking,
that's the first time I ever heard the signifying monkey
oh,
was
yeah.
somebody inebriated trying to recite it down on the corner.
Do you do the signifying monkey?
I have done the signifying monkey, but it requires a great deal of
Oh,
RAM.
yeah. I'm
You
not
got to
calling
free
you
up
on
some
the spot.
data.
But you know, I think stories are roots and branches, and
Yes,
especially from what you're saying, you know, even the folk. I mean, the folk tales as well as the community tales and the personal tales. Whether you're working with Anansi or Jack or whomever, I think there's
right.
something about the culture in all the stories.
There
What do you think?
is. I know that there is because, what was the origin of storytelling? To sustain culture. One of the greatest pieces of storytelling is done by M. Night Shyamalan, the movie The Village, where you think that you're back in the 1600s for about 35 minutes, and then you realize you're not. I almost let out one of those woohoo in the movie theater because I love those twists and turns that a good teller, whether it's visual or acoustic, or even if it's somebody showing you how to knit or crochet and they're using their hands to tell you this story. There are
Right.
just so many ways to transmit information. And it's about emotion. What emotion do you want to elicit from the person who's listening? Is it a story for them to remember some instructions? Like the story your mother might tell you about the first time she baked that cake that you like so much? Or is it something that convinces somebody to do something that they weren't even considering? I've been musing over the last couple of days about the word marketing, which is now spelled Storytelling.
Yeah,
Storyteller.
exactly. Yeah. Oh,
Everything
yeah.
about storytelling. The
Oh, yeah.
doctor is a storyteller.
Yeah,
The mechanic is a
you're not
storyteller.
selling products. You're selling stories that
We're
move
selling
products.
stories,
Hmm.
and everybody has one. The issue is, do they have the interest in sharing it and the courage to do so?
But I'm open.
Because if you got the interest and you got courage, you'll build skill.
Right. And you know it's a craft. And
Yes.
you've had the privilege of, you know, looking at the work of people like Paul Lawrence Dunbar and what's
Hmm.
close there. Who has influenced you or helped you look at the shape of how you move story?
Well, funny you talk about Dunbar. Um, my mother's oldest sister used to set me in her quite wide lap and recite poetry to me. Her father could recite a poem that he had learned in the second grade. And I just thought it was fascinating that my 60 something year old grandfather could remember something from when he was 6, 7 years old. But his daughter, my Auntie Eveline, used to sit me up in her lap and she would recite poetry, which I later learned was Dunbar and Langston Hughes.
Wow.
And she would read the Huntington Herald Dispatch in living full color comics to me on Sunday afternoon. And my favorite, she would do Snuffy Smith and the Cats and Jammer Kids. And she would create ethnic voices for them that would just make me chuckle. And like I said, she was buxom. So when we laughed together, everything went up and down. Me, her. And so when I got grown and moved here to Dayton and reheard those poems and saw them on the page in print, I was like, I was being introduced to Paul Laurence Dunbar with the oral tradition when I was 4, 5, and 6 years old.
I love
And that circle, in my world, we taught everything is cyclical. And when my circle brought me to Dayton, Find the Dunbar House was at the top of my list. And I spent 5 years until the pandemic being a chief volunteer docent, creating what's called the Dunbar Literary Circle, and working with the organization ASALA, the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, as founded by a distant cousin of my daddy's daddy, Carter G. Woodson. So I am, if you believe in destiny, this was my portion, right? My dad used to say, "Just let her talk. She'll sound like she knows something, even if she don't. That's gonna get her far in life."
And
And I was like,
that's
"Oh, are
why.
you telling me I'm a con artist, Daddy?"
So
High
storyteller
compliment.
or con artist or you know. storytelling is a lived experience. Um,
Absolutely.
and I myself, although I'm a writer, I work in the lived experience to find, even if I'm working on Pandora and I'm talking about the
Mm.
misery that she had, I'm going to go out and look at the world before I write it down. Um,
And and I'm going to look at some of the variants because there are, there's only certain human themes in the lived expression. And so the genre of that story, of Pandora's box, curiosity overcoming instruction, mandate, which brings the world a whole new experience, misery in this case.
right.
But there's a story from Western Africa called Namba, and it's the same thing. A little girl gets enticed to bring home the big pumpkin, not the small one she was sent to go get. And so her greed brings misery into her family. Same story.
Wow. And that's the whole thing. They're universal implication. But the storyteller puts the twists and like you said, you know, unpredictable changes and resistance. And sometimes that's a good writer can do that, but I think if they have a storytelling mind, they can do that.
Hmm.
But I'm biased, I'll be the first to tell you that. But here's the deal. You've already started talking about story. Give us a hint, a tease on what you might be telling at debut, but not the whole thing. Just give us an idea. So if someone's watching this,
Okay.
they go, "I heard that."
Well, first I'll say that some of my greatest inspiring moments happen in the throne room.
Okay. Some don't know
Or
what the throne room is.
or if my hands are in water. Water is a channel. So I was reading a book and I was about to put my whole body in some water. And this book is by a well known African American female from Ohio. That's all
Oh,
I'm going to say.
okay.
And I read this story that was inside her story and said, "Oh, I think that's it. I think that's the one." Now, I've been trying to move some other stuff because, after 30 years, there's very few stories that I know that I haven't told, except maybe all of my own story. I ain't told all the elements of mine. One day, maybe when they're sitting in a circle looking at a picture of me and I'm in a jar or in a box,
Well, I
they'll
hope
tell
I
some
hope
of
you
those
stay
stories.
unfinished because we want you to keep telling.
But this story is a pre-Civil War story, and it's cross-cultural, and it's cross-generational, and it's about survival. That's all I'm gonna say.
No, and that you've got my interest right away. And so, why come on debut and tell it for the first time? I've talked to some people, they're like, I don't know if I'm ready for that. But for me, it's not a fearful action, it's a sharing action.
Well, I'm so glad you said that, and that's the reason why I agreed to do this because you told me it didn't have to be perfect.
That's correct.
But however, in the way I tell, people ask me, "How do you do that?" And I said, "Well, it's like I can't memorize the words because if somebody cough, I'll lose my place up here in my memory." So what I try to do is to hold the story in a visual format back here in my cortex. And then might be old enough. Do you remember them little film strips used to come in a little canister, and
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
the teacher who was responsible for the projector would come in and thread it.
I was the
You
AV
know,
guy at the
were
high
you the
school.
you were the guy with the gray cart?
They could burn up.
So I hold the story like a film strip,
Uh-huh.
and then I run it like a viewing, and it's like captions without captions, right? So my goal is that the language is colorful enough and the rhythm is sufficient to rock you into a place where you've shut down some of your mental receptors and your astral self begins to open that silver cord that connects us all as humanity. That I'm riding on the silver cord is how I like to say it. And I'm having a opportunity to transmit emotion to the audience's receptors, and we're all kind of like riding that wave together. so that we create a real small universe of how many it is plus the teller. And for those moments, we're able to transcend space and time and just be in this shared experience. That's when we walk away, we'll all eventually figure out the various ways that the stories have touched us. Because, the first immediate response is usually, yay, woo, that's good, she good, she good. And then a couple of weeks later to be like, you remember when she said so and so? Because
Exactly.
I get a high in telling. I think the hardest part of telling is editing while you're talking. I have writer friends who are not you who say, I forget that I don't think of you as a writer. I think of you as a storyteller. And I said, do you think that writing precedes telling?
Right.
Do you really think that? Oh, I guess not. And I said, when a storyteller is telling, are you aware that they are editing based on the audience's response?
And it's immediate.
Oh, I never thought about it like that.
And it's
And I was like,
published.
yeah,
It
because if the audience decides they want to laugh and laugh long, I've got to figure how to rest in that experience instead of rushing it because I don't want to miss the electricity that's flowing. Or if the audience is bored and I ain't moving fast enough, I need to drop a few sentences and get that story on down the road. So that synergy between souls.
and those
Some
are
are on active and some
tho-
are on mute, but everybody's having an experience.
they should all come together. Writers
Yes.
need to talk out loud, and
Mm-hmm.
and storytellers need to write.
Mm-hmm.
Like you said, everything comes into a circle, and we need not say I'm just a writer, I'm just a teller. We need to.
Mm-mm.
That's like saying I only have a voice and no ears. We need more. And I know that you look for stories that don't give the answer immediately, that
Yeah.
we have to think about. And I
Yes.
and I imagine that'll happen at debut, which happens
I hope.
when is debut?
March 28th.
At what time is
Uh
4:30 Eastern Standard Time?
4:30 Eastern.
And as we
For,
can see,
for, for me though,
yes.
it's gonna start at 6:30 in the morning.
Oh, oh,
When I wake, I will be in debut mode. It's
excellent.
like
I
today,
love
I
that.
wanted to make sure I was able to conserve all my energy.
Well, we appreciate
When I have storytelling performance dates or I have to channel that stuff, I cannot have anything else in the way. So I will wake up that day and it will be debut all day long. And then the live portion will be the part where I go, whew,
it.
now I can check that off the list.
But I appreciate that honor because,
Oh,
I
I
always
do.
say the
I
best
appreciate it.
storytellers arrive early and leave late. They arrive early so they know where they are, and
Yeah,
which means the community. And then they leave late so they can listen to the others say, "You took me to here.
yeah.
Um, did you know about here?" Because it's a playground for more stories. Omope, we could talk forever.
We could, but we're not gonna.
No, but at the same time, I am going to give you the last word. Ladies and gentlemen, debuting her story, not as a storyteller. She's an accomplished storyteller, but this story will be first. Let Omope have the last word.
Well, I must say that storytelling started for me listening to elders tell stories about their youth. And then one day, splashed across the New York Times was a phrase that said, Jackie Torrance brings storytelling back. And I thought, where did storytelling go? But knowing that there was now a public focus on sharing experiences excited me. As a cultural geographer and sociologist, I immediately understood the power of community making through story. And I thank you for being a part of this story here at Debut. And don't forget, tell yours because untold stories die on the vine. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you on March 28th.